Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Horror Room. I'm Travis Bruce, and today we're doing another indie horror spotlight. I have with us today, he is a writer and director of an upcoming movie that's going to be released early 2025, and it's called Mr. Meeches Massacre. I have with us today the writer and director once again, Nathan Latrim. Nathan, welcome to the Horror Room, buddy.
Thank you for having me. It's been an honor already, and I've been here for 5 seconds.
I've been seeing like the ads of your production all over the indie Facebook groups, and it looks like an exciting movie, man. So tell us a little bit about Mr. Meeches Massacre.
Yeah, so this was a project back in the conceptual phase of just throwing ideas at the wall and seeing what sticks. I think I had started writing it for a college film class last calendar year, or I guess the year before, end of like 2023, and I had just, cranked it out real fast, turned it in. But after that, I was like, well, there's something here that I really like. I don't know what it is, but there's something that I want to work on. So I was just talking over with Art, who's a producer on this film as well, Mr. Meeches. And I was like, well, I think, before I graduate and move out, I've got time for probably one more big project. I've been thinking about this horror movie. What do you think, et cetera, et cetera. And then from there, we talked more about it. I developed it a lot more. Thankfully, it's in a much better place than that assignment I turned in. But yeah, that's how it started. And then, we started putting plans together and looking at, can this happen? And if so, what do we need to work with? And I'm a big fan of, indie filmmaking and doing a lot of impossible stuff, because people always say that, you can only do it this way. You need like $1 million for a short. You can't do anything less than 500, that kind of stuff. And I hate all that stuff. So I love doing impossible stuff. And this is one of them. Even, from the conceptual phase, people were telling us that, we couldn't make it for this budget, or we're going to run into problems. And every film runs into problems. Part of filmmaking is adapting. Yeah. So I'm really glad that we got everything we did previously. We shot for a day in November of last year, and we were there for like a full 12-hour. Like, it was a pretty steady, packed day. We got a handful of test scenes that we'll show to like investors and producers and whatnot. But more excitingly, we shot the first about 5 minutes of the film, and we got like final footage, quality stuff. And we're hoping that, well, we'll see how editing, schedules align, but we're hoping that we can release the first 5 minutes of the movie within the next couple weeks, I would say. And then that'll be, from that release to the final cut, it'll be the same 5 minutes. And that's going to be our in place of a trailer, just to give people something to watch ahead of time as we keep, toiling away at it. So yeah, and it's indie horror comedy. I forgot to answer the question almost of what it's about. That would be great to do. So yeah.
I'm about to say, who is Mr. Meech?
That's a fantastic question. He is, he's probably, this is a little bigger so you can see. He's the mascot of a daycare center, of course, all fictionalized. May or may not be inspired by a certain like rat-run child casino that sells pizza. But definitely a little bit inspired by that. But yeah, he was our mascot. That was drawn by Cameron. He's our concept artist and illustrator on the movie. And I sat with him for a while, and because we had written the movie, or I had written the movie and talked it over with people, before I knew who our killer was going to be. I just had a placeholder. I was like, hey, it's probably a cat or something. But I sat down with Cameron and we just knocked ideas around for a while. So he was super helpful. And then, yeah, he came up with the logo design and all of that. I put like finishing touches, but very, very little. Most of that was all him. But he's our giant hippo animatronic. Of course, in real life, we'll just build a suit. But in the movie, animatronic. And it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a crazy mess to work with him. And he's, of course, the killer for the movie, which I would hope is obvious by all the blood and stuff.
Yes.
We were trying to figure out how we could make a really exciting but like contained and feasible indie horror comedy like this. So all of our characters are daycare employees towards the end of the shift. Later in the evening, maybe like half an hour before they all go home. And then, of course, the building accidentally gets thrown into lockdown. They all get trapped inside, and then the giant killer hippo's running around, and they got to get out of there. which is, pretty easy a conflict. Don't die. So yeah, that's our main crux of the movie, and he's going to be a lot of fun. We started putting together. We've got a lot of concept and stuff for him. Hopefully, we can start building him soon. I'm gonna look into that a lot more rigorously over the next few days. But yeah, it's going to be very exciting. And I hate them, animatronics. I think they're terrible. And I know that whoever's in there is going to scare me to death at least once, and then just jump at me a little bit. So if I ever die on set by a heart attack, that'll be why.
That's the reason why.
But anyway, yeah, it's fun. Hopefully, it will be a blast. It's been a blast so far. It's been crazy stressful, but like in a good way. So
now the gore amount. Where are we going to be at? Are we going to be at low, medium, or high?
That's a fantastic question. Well, first I'll say that either way, sound design is going to be super important. I think with a lot of movies, I mean ours included, sound is so important, and a lot of people just kind of overlook it. But it also determines with horror movies and gore and stuff how easily an audience buys it. Do they really believe it? Does it sound right or just sound good? But I actually have with me this, which might answer part of your question. This is part of one of our wonderful filming things from November. There we go.
What is that?
Let me take this lid off. Well, it's a piece of a gut, sort of.
Oh, nice.
And I'll just leave that up to interpretation where that comes from. But it will be seeing a little bit of action in that first 5 minutes once we release it. But yeah, I talked to our production designer who is doubling as our special effects person for the day. And I said, can I keep that? And I could, which is fantastic. So yeah, we're going to go for as much as we can. I've definitely been telling people there's going to be at least one exploding head. I'm very, very set on making sure we can do that. I don't know how yet, but I'll talk with the special effects people. We'll get it done. So yeah, as much as we can. And then, obviously the final budget is going to determine a little bit of that, but we're at least going to have some really, really good kills in there, which I think is important for a movie of that genre. Definitely.
Yeah. Now, I'm assuming we're going to be using all practical effects, correct?
Yes. I'm a big fan of cheesy movies, bad movies, mostly horror movies. But across the board, even the really good ones, at least in my opinion, are practical all the way, if not most of the way. Mm-hmm. So with us, we're going to be as practical as possible. Ironically, it's actually cheaper for us to go practical because of the scale that we're, filming at. We're not Avengers 95, I hate to say. For them, it's probably cheaper to do VFX and faster. But for us, it's just more feasible to do the, practical, blood squirting and what have you.
And it's fun, too.
We're as practical as we can. It's fantastic. We covered this in blood for the November, and it was a little bit messy, but it was really fun. It was really fun. So, yeah, as practical as we can make it. That's our goal.
Now, it sounds like a fun, old school, retro slasher. So are we going to be seeing any titties?
That's a great question. I'll say, not from our actors, but there's I will say there's a little bit of a running gag that I have in a couple of the scenes, actually, which will come back a little bit on that. So I guess everyone will have to stay tuned. But it is acknowledged. It's at least acknowledged in the movie.
Okay. All right. So what made you, you've always been a horror fan, but what made you decide to say, you know what, fuck it, I am going to make a fucking horror movie?
Yeah, my first movie, so actually it's right back there, which I had shot with Art, who plays the older rock star character. And that was a very, very small, contained, we shot it for $1,000 was the budget, like a family comedy movie. That was real small. And even then we were sweating a little bit. But I had done that movie, and I was kind of doing it, because other people said I couldn't, but I was also interested, could I finish a movie? Because that's such a huge undertaking. And then we did end up finishing it. It took a little longer than we thought, but we did end up finishing it, which was important. And then I realized that once we had done it, it was a lot in the moment, but in retrospect, it was so much more accessible than I thought it ever was, really. Because I was in the mindset of, you have to go to Hollywood, you have to produce, a $5 million movie. It has to be all this and that. But it doesn't, at least not to the level that, a lot of people think it does. I finished that movie, and I do like it. I like it. I think for what we had to work with, it's pretty good. But I wanted to do something else, like something larger, something more, bring in more talent, more people, what have you. And then, and then that was around the time I think that I had submitted that original draft of that like assignment that I just threw in. And then after that, I thought, well, yeah, there's something here that I like a lot. It's a lot of stuff that I hadn't or still haven't seen in some or a lot of horror movies, at least altogether. And that was kind of my answer of, well, the perfect movie that I want like this doesn't exist. I've got time to do one more. Let's see if we can make it. And so far we're going. I won't complain.
Now, okay, so as an audience member, are we going to find out what Mr. Meech's motivations for killing people are?
Yes, actually, that was one of the things that I was trying to figure out with the script. I mean, first draft, like for people who don't know a lot about screenwriting, that's kind of considered the vomit draft. Some people call it, where you're kind of just throwing stuff out. Just the goal is to finish it, because if you get caught up in editing, it'll never get done, and then etc. So yeah, the first draft was a lot of stuff that I liked, but it didn't all connect right. And we were answering a lot of questions of, sitting down with folks, and I was asking them, what doesn't work for you? What do you want answered question-wise? One of them was, why is this giant, daycare mascot just slaughtering people now? And that is a great question. And it does get answered. It does get answered in the movie. That one I wanted to make as clear as I could. So yeah, you'll definitely get the answer for that. I think pretty early on. Yeah, probably in the first 30 minutes, I think. Yeah.
Which is good, because I mean, the older I've gotten, I'm 41 now, which is not old, but I feel old. But like the older I've gotten, I've been a horror fan ever since I was 5, and in the golden ages of the 80s. And like the older I've gotten, though, I need motive for the killer. I can't. That's my biggest problem with the original Terrifier. I did not know it was just slaughtering for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and I'm like, it didn't give us anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good hook, but you've got to have a little more. Yeah.
Yes, to keep me in for an hour and a half. So, but a good horror movie makes you feel something about the killer. Like either you're like, wow, I see where they're coming from, or wow, this is an awful person.
Yeah.
And I feel like some filmmakers forget that, and you just have a killer with no backstory.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those. I mean, I've seen a bunch of them too, varying qualities, of course. But yeah, I mean, I feel like those movies, or at least those sorts of movies, they get a cool concept, but then they just run with that and they don't flesh it out as much. And that was one of the things that I was really looking at, really concerned about in the script phase was, I like the concept, giant killer hippo running around killing people is awesome.
It is,
but it actually needs to have, it's got to have the fleshed out characters. He needs to make sense. Like, why is he doing this? Location has to make sense. The plot has to make sense. And another thing that, I really wanted to try and hone in on was everybody's seen a horror movie where the characters make the stupidest decisions, or someone's like, this house has been haunted for 50 years. And the dad says, we'll buy it. That's, I mean, they're funny, but in the plot, they drive me crazy. So with this movie, we also wanted to make sure that the decisions the characters make sense for, their character. So, and being a daycare, they have a limited space, so they can't just, run out the front door because it's locked and etc. But yeah, I really wanted to focus and make sure that all the decisions they made, if they weren't smart decisions, at least made sense. Like if they're on the run, you don't just duck into a broom closet. You've got to look for a bigger room than that. Exactly. So yeah, stuff like that, of making sure that whatever their actions are, they're justified, they make sense, and trying not to like play the audience as being dumb, because the audience in general is just really smart in terms of film watching and movie watching. So even if they can't articulate why a plot point doesn't make sense or a decision doesn't work, they'll know that it doesn't work. So yeah, I was really, really focusing on making sure all of that works. It all makes sense. And I think it does. So I think we accomplished that. It took a hot minute, but I think we did it.
That's awesome, because like the last horror movie, which was a big name horror movie, that I felt like it insulted audiences' intelligence, was Halloween Kills. And I enjoyed Halloween Kills on my first watch in the theaters, but the whole entire time, even the second time watching, I was like, people are not that stupid. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, yeah,
every one of the characters in the movie was making some of the stupidest. Like no one is that stupid to make those
yeah,
decisions. And I'm
yeah,
like, is this insulting? Like is this they're insulting my intelligence? Like no one is making, even the dumbest person is not making these decisions.
yeah, yeah. That was why. I mean, I was definitely sweating over it. Maybe other people weren't as much, but I was really focused in on like, yeah, making sure that doesn't happen. Thankfully, I mean, one of the characters in the movie, I don't want to give too much away, but one of the characters in the movie is like, leading the entire group and is coming up with, I would like to say, some pretty smart stuff, at least for in the moment. Of course, it doesn't all work out as planned because it's a horror movie, but coming up with those plans is really important. And, having a character who is, more of a leader or taking charge, or at least, smarter than the average bear to do the Yogi Bear a little bit. Yeah, I think is a really, really good decision to have in the movie. And we haven't shot all that yet, of course, but I'm very glad in the script, at least, we've got that locked in, and that we have characters, at least one or two characters who are smarter than, the average horror movie characters. But we'll see. We'll see how that lands. I think it'll land well.
All right, so I'm gonna ask you a controversial question.
Oh, go for it. I'm excited.
Now, and people have different views on this, but now when it comes to indie filmmaking, with streaming services like Tubi, Plex,
Hmm.
and so forth, it's a lot easier to get your movies on a platform for
Yeah.
people to see. But do you think that's also watering down the product because there
Mm.
is no filter, there is no gatekeeper?
Right.
Anybody can get their movie up, especially on Tubi right now.
Yeah, yeah. That's actually a fantastic question. And I'm glad somebody asked that because a lot of people just skirt around it.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, is it watering it down? I mean, inevitably, yes. That's just a fact of that's like, the studios are making more movies a year. Is that watering it down? Of course. It's just by the nature of the definition. There's just more to choose from. People need more to hook them into something. So in that sense, yeah, I mean, it definitely is. But I also don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I know a lot of people have vocalized very, very loudly that that's a huge negative, but I don't think so. Now, I mean, Tubi is pretty easy to get your films on, and for people who don't know, it's very easy, like quality control. You just need like captions, some files, and whatnot, and then your film's on there. The other ones are a little harder, but all relatively simple. But I'm glad. Maybe I'm a little young to say it, but I'm glad that these days there's enough tools for filmmaking that that's even a possibility. I think it's great that people are concerned about, are there too many films versus, even 10 years ago, they were concerned about how am I ever going to make a film? I think that's a fantastic switch in terms of questions. And I love bad movies. I'll say some of the indie films I've seen are not very good, and that's okay. Not every movie is going to be great, and you learn along the way, etc. But at least I get so much joy out of watching those, especially the really bad ones. So maybe if I'm a fan of somebody's movies, that's not a great thing, but I love them, and I know there's a built-in audience for them. So I'm perfectly happy with seeing a bunch of films on there. And some of my most entertaining movie watching experiences have been on like Amazon Prime, or Tubi is another really, really good one. So yeah, I won't complain. I think, is it watering it down? Sure. But I also think it's like complaining about having too much food to choose from. At least you've got that choice to argue about. So yeah, I think it's a great thing.
But doesn't it make it harder as a filmmaker too? Because there's so many opportunities for people to choose through. Like,
Yeah.
I go on Tubi right now and go under horror. There's thousands and thousands of horror movies. But does that make it, as a horror filmmaker, does that make you have to even put even more effort to stand out?
I think, yeah, absolutely. And I also think that's a great thing. Whereas, obviously like 10 years ago, maybe even less in some cases, but however many years ago, it was barely a possibility. And if it was, you're spending a lot of money on the gear and moving all the footage over and all the production costs and whatnot. Whereas now, obviously, like you mentioned, it's much easier to get an indie film on there, get it sent out to whatever platforms. And I think, yeah, it does make it harder to draw people in because, as you mentioned, there's just more out there. So you've got to have something that makes yours stand out even more among the other ones. And I think it's definitely a limitation, but I think it's a limitation that people can work within, like, creatively. I know that myself, I usually find that, I mean, with this film, the budget's the limitation. We don't have $20 million, sadly, but maybe one day. But I mean, with limitations, you find creative ways to get around it. It's a lot of creative problem solving. And obviously, if you make, you know, the 39th, you know, zombie movie that's just thrown on Tubi, you're going to have a little tougher of a battle.
Yes.
But I also think that the people who are super passionate about it and are doing it, you know, really well, or as well as they can to their extent, I think they're going to find that, you know, their movies end up standing out anyway. There's obviously going to be the ones that cost, you know, $5 that someone just threw up with their camera. But I also think in their own right that, you know, it's nice that they were able to make that. There's still something in there. It's still worth doing even at that level. But yeah, the ones that stand out, I think, are going to have the work put in that hopefully makes, you know, gives them a reason to stand out. Yeah, and I think it just forces filmmakers to be a little more creative, which is maybe a terrible way to say it.
Yes.
But it's, you know, yeah, it forces them to make bolder decisions, do stuff that they wouldn't normally do that might be outside their comfort zone, which in turn makes their film stand out more. So yeah, hopefully with that, we're going to get more films that are, you know, pushing different envelopes, or more films that are doing crazy stuff we haven't seen before. And especially on the indie level, where there's much more freedom to do that. You know, it's not like Marvel where you've got 20 different executives and, you know, 30 teams to okay it. You know, usually it's you, maybe the couple key crew that are on there, if that. So yeah, I think there's a lot more freedom, and yeah, it's definitely gonna be tougher to stand out, but the ones that do are gonna hopefully do some crazy stuff we haven't seen before. Or they won't, and we'll just have a bunch more bad movies and I'll watch them anyway.
But it's interesting. So I'm a huge bad movie watcher, and that's why
Go ahead. Yeah.
that was the basis of my channel originally, to review bad movies and on a bad movie scale. And but there are some fun bad movies out there, you know, horror movies. There's some fun ones, but there's some ones that, like, but listen, there's some great no budget, but there's some great no budget indie horror movies that I'm like, wow, if they actually had they did an amazing job with no budget. Imagine if they had a budget. But then I also see the ones who have a budget, and I'm like,
like they didn't use it quite right. Yeah. It's really tough to make every dollar count. It's a challenge, but some of them do it well.
I'm like, okay, clearly they used their budget to get Danny Trejo in the movie for 10 minutes, you know?
Yeah.
Which I love Danny Trejo, but
right. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, some of them, it's just a case of how you use the budget. Because I mean, like the movie, like we shot very, very, like that $1,000 movie, that was nothing, but we got it in like 6 days, 7 days, in and out as fast as we could. But there are some people that I know personally, sadly, who would look at that and say, that's not 10 grand. We can't do more than like a day's worth of whatever. I think it's all about, I mean, breaking down the budget. And my one term that I always use is resource filmmaking of, you know, you probably most likely for indie films can't make the next Lord of the Rings or the next Star Wars or what have you. It's just too big. But you could do, you know, a small story about like a peasant and, you know, not in Lord of the Rings, but in that fantasy example, or like, you know, there's a starship captain who's trying to fix a ship before it crashes or whatever. You can do a story that's, you know, something adjacent to those. But yeah, working within your limitations and looking at, you know, what do you have available already? Do you have a camera and lights, or do you have, you know, your apartment that you can use, which we did use for that movie? Do you have a house? You know, whose car can you find for this scene or that scene? And, you know, what actors do you know? And I'm very glad that at this point with the Mr. Meeches, we can actually pay everybody, which is awesome. The last movie, we did pay them a little bit, but it was like, you know, points on the back end and meals and whatnot. And it was a very collaborative thing at that point. But I'm glad we can pay people now, because that's a much better feeling. But yeah, I think working with what you have and figuring out exactly what you have to spend and where. And then somebody told me once, refusing to spend money, which I don't think across the board works. But as a general statement, like, you've got to figure out, should you just go to the Goodwill and find, you know, these costumes, or do you want for a costume to bring somebody in? And then which person do you bring in for what character and what have you? So there's a lot of balancing a lot of that stuff, figuring out kind of choosing your own battles of like where you want to win and which ones you think you can, let skirt by.
Now, when you were writing the story and the script, did you? I don't. You're probably not going to even answer this question, but did you already have in mind? Let me leave the door open for a sequel,
Mm,
or did you close it out? And if there's success, some kind
yeah.
of way you'll bring Mr. Meeches back.
Yeah, I mean that's a fantastic question, and yeah, I thought a lot about that too because, in a perfect world, I'll say perfect scenario, we make this movie, someone's like, "Oh, you made it for that budget? That's nothing. Here's double that. Go make another one," because that's even double would be nothing compared to the studio stuff. But yeah, so I did think a lot about that, and I know that I think Jason Blum mentioned it one time, and I always call back to him a lot of his advice for up and coming filmmakers was especially horror make the best movie you can. If it does well, then worry about the sequel. And I wanted to take that into consideration. So yeah, I mean, it's a fairly closed story. There's a little bit of a fourth wall break, little teaser at the end, kind of making fun of movies that leave you on a cliffhanger. Because I know I've seen some that do, and it drives me crazy. So we do it a little bit as a joke, and then if we do make a sequel, then it wasn't a joke. It was funny and also worked. And if we don't make a sequel, it was a very meta joke that works anyway. So yeah, but I definitely kept this one as contained as possible. And yeah, really wanted it to stand out that even if we didn't do another one, making sure that on its own, it's a good movie. It's got a lot of good stuff, and people are going to want to watch it.
Okay, awesome. All right, man. So listen, I'm going to shoot to the fun part of the interview. I'm going to ask you 3 random horror questions. You ready?
Oh, okay, I'm ready.
All right. So who is on your Mount Rushmore of horror villains?
Okay.
Who were 4 Mount Rushmore?
Okay. I'm gonna have to throw in Stripe from Gremlins because in my heart I have to. I can't help it. I love those movies, and the first one especially.
I got
Obviously,
my Gizmo shirt on.
yeah, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's got to be in there somewhere.
Yeah.
I would probably. I mean, Freddy Krueger. I mean, those movies, Nightmare on Elm Street. I loved those. I still haven't seen all of them, but the few I have seen, I do enjoy a lot, and I love the cheesiness of it when it gets later on. So he'd definitely be up there. I mean, I feel like it would almost be a cardinal sin not to put Jason up there as well. I mean, I can't. I mean, Friday the 13th as well. Like the first one, especially, seeing that early on, and I mean, learning that slasher films were a thing and getting into horror movies more. That was definitely one of the more gateway, films in a good way. And I'd probably say the last spot is tough. I would have to say only because the sequel won me over. I would have to say Art the Clown. Terrifier 2, I liked a lot. The first one that you had mentioned was kind of motivation. Like it was fun and entertaining, but at a point it needed more substance. But the second one, I think, definitely, I mean, it hooked me in, obviously, but it kept me there because it had some more interesting stuff going on. And I think they're making a third one already, which is good for them because they're making a bunch of money. But I feel like that one's going to be probably the best one because I think they're really learning from like what you had mentioned. Yes, making sure it's fun, but also making sure it's good. Like it makes sense. You understand the characters and the villains and everything. So yeah, those would probably have to be my 4.
Okay. All right. And the second question I'm going to ask you is, who do you think? Okay, who is your favorite horror filmmaker of all time?
That's a good question. And I think the easy answer is going to have to probably be Sam Raimi. I think that's that. Out of the terms of filmography as a whole, because obviously I know James Wan's another really good one too. But in terms of filmography as a whole versus just a couple or one like isolated film that I really really like, yeah, I feel like that would have to be it. Either that or maybe throw in a Jason Blum in there, even though Norman nowadays is more of a managerial kind of role.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I really respect both of their drives, especially early on, especially Blumhouse, because now it's a whole company that he built up, from starting these really, really small movies. But yeah, probably I'll take half of both of them and sew them together. That would be my 1.
Okay, well, who's a horror filmmaker that I'm not saying you hate their movies, but you're not a fan of?
That is a good question. Well, I'll say there's some really, really horrible, horrible B movies that I've seen that are not great that I can't remember even who made them. Let me think of one. This will probably have to be one of those. But oh, you know what? I will. I do actually know. Okay, I can't remember his name, but it is the guy who I think he wrote all the Final Destinations. He might have directed some of them, but he definitely I think was a producer on at least one of them. But I had seen. I mean, obviously the writer has a lot of control over, I mean, the movie
Yeah.
as a whole. It's not final control, but you know, you got to make the characters, flesh them out right, whatever. And it's a little bit of a bias for me, but I hate doomsday movies. I feel like when I watch them and then everybody dies at the end, I just kind of wasted my time and I roll my eyes. And Final Destination, I like it's a fun idea and I like the concept, but it kind of feels like what I think you maybe you mentioned earlier, but taking a concept and that's it, and then just running with that without fleshing other stuff out. And they're entertaining and you know they're kind of neat to see, but after like the third one, I get the idea everybody is gonna die. It's you know, it's
Yes.
fun to see how it happens, but I just can't, it drives me crazy of like I not that I wasted my time, but it feels like that on an emotional level, having seen the movie, you know, hour and a half, 2 hours later, and the characters didn't change, everybody's dead. Ugh. So I would probably have to say some people behind those movies in particular, but they make money. So
They do, and they're making another one. See, I'm not. I
mm,
don't hate the Final Destination movies, but I think it should have been just a one-off. You know what I mean? I think it should have just been one
yeah,
film.
okay, one, yeah, I could agree,
It
yeah,
was a
because
great idea. I think it was a great
yeah,
original idea. I think once you do it more than once, it's like
yeah,
it's the. I say the same thing about the Saw movies. Like, great
yeah,
idea. Maybe do it once or twice, but if you do it 10 times, then it's like, ugh.
yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that's just the best way to put it. Yeah, because the first movie, watching that, obviously the movie's called Final Destination. There's a skull on the front. You assume that everyone's going to die, but you don't know for sure, and that's I think
Exactly.
where part of the tension comes in of is anyone going to make it out of this? And then once they do it the second time around, you know, and then the third, and then etc. It's like, well, you already know going in, all the characters are not going to make it. So I'm like, kind of, you know, what's the point? That's my opinion on a little harsh, but my also opinion on prequels of, well, if it's a prequel to something that's already out, we already know how it's going to end. Otherwise, the sequel wouldn't be possible. So where are the stakes? So that drives me crazy too. But you
But
know,
there's
they still make money. So
but there was one prequel that came out recently, and that's Pearl, which is the prequel to X.
I
Pearl
did
was
hear about that.
amazing. Pearl was absolutely that's actually there was two prequels, and I just
Mm,
badmouthed Saul, but Saul X, which is a prequel to the original Saul, was
yes.
amazing.
I
And
did like that
Pearl,
one a lot. I did like
yeah,
that one.
and Pearl is an amazing prequel to X.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, it. Can, but I'm trying to think off the top of my head, and no, I mean, there's not that many prequels that hit it on the head. And
I mean, it's tough to do. I think one of the
yeah,
reasons that Saw did it really well was that obviously we know like whatever this movie is, he's going to die eventually, and whatever that movie was, forget if it was like 4, 5, or 6 or
yes,
what have you.
so somewhere in
But
there,
yeah,
yes.
eventually he's going to die. But I wasn't when I was watching it. I was less concerned about if he's going to die. I know he is eventually, but all the other characters I was interested in. I don't want to spoil it too much. People haven't seen it, but yeah, I mean, especially when the traps don't work as intended and whatnot. I mean, that was really, really engaging because then I knew there were stakes because these characters don't show up in the other movies, so their fate isn't sealed, and it's that you know uncertainty that you know really keeps tension versus you know if you know what everyone's fate is, it's a lot less interesting.
I agree. All right, Nathan, where can everyone find you, my friend?
That's a fantastic question. Well, if you find me in real life, I'll give you a handshake and say good job. It's probably not that hard, but I'll do it anyway. Yeah, I mean, for this movie, we've got Facebook that we do pretty regularly, and Instagram. We've got both of those going simultaneously, and that stuff. I mean, we've got a lot of behind the scenes photos. We've got some videos and stuff we'll put out, and once we also release the first 5 minutes, we're going to put it on both of those as well. I think Instagram should let me do it. We'll see. I'm still learning social media and technology, but I'm getting better. So yeah, we'll release it on those pages, and that's especially Facebook because it's just easy to put out news. But both of them for sure. I think at this point, because I've tried it and it worked for me, if you Google Mr. Meeches Massacre, I think everything pops up, and I'm very proud that it's finally started to do that because it's much easier to Google, than a bunch of other stuff. But
it really is.
Yeah, those are the two that we've really got going, and then we'll see if we can open up a couple more. I'm talking with, I say kids, people my age who in their 20-somethings who know social media, and I'm learning a little bit, so we might launch a couple other ones, but Facebook and Instagram for sure, and we've got all the updates coming out there. And extra surprises. I don't want to say yet, but very, very interesting, gross stuff.
Nice. I thought you were about to say Danny Trejo is going to be in your movie.
I won't just. I'll say it's probably not going to happen, but you never know. Maybe he's in town one day, and I see him on the street, and we're filming the block over. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Nathan, it's been a blast having you on, man. Listen. Once the movie's released, man, I'm going to have you back on. I take a look at it, man. I'm going to have you back on and definitely talk about it.
Absolutely. It's been fantastic. And I should have way more props at that point and on display all around me.
Awesome, man. Listen, you should make a t-shirt of that, man. That would be badass.
Oh, that's a fantastic thing that you actually mentioned. I have my incredible, well, this is only one that I made, but we made a few Mr. Meeches stuff, and one of the things at the end of the movie, not really a spoiler, but it ends in a gift shop. I'll say that. So we're going to have a lot of, Mr. Meeches like shirts and stuff. The secret is that we don't have anywhere to put those. So we're going to give them away at some point, and raffle them off and what have you. So, yeah.
I was about to say, I would totally wear a Mr. Meeches shirt, man.
Yeah, we'll have them.
Awesome. All right. Well, listen, everyone, follow my man Nathan and look out for Mr. Meeches Massacre coming soon. All right, everyone. Yes.
We'll see.
All right, everyone. Fingers crossed, right?
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you for coming to the Horror Room. I'm Travis Bruce. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.
Goodbye.